Hi students, it's Mrs. T, and this is the first lecture that you need to watch and take notes on for week 13. I can't believe we're in week 13 because we only have 15 and a half weeks in the whole semester. So we've got like 3.5 weeks left, this one, 14, 15, and then half of the next one. So we are on our downward slide. Hopefully it's going to be a slow, smooth, comfortable downward slide for Unit 4. We're talking about some pretty interesting stuff, in my opinion, but also in the past I've had a lot of students say to me during this Unit 4 and the content that we investigate in Unit 4, I've had a lot of students say to me, why didn't you start out with this stuff, because this is like so interesting what we're talking about. Well, the reason we waited until now to talk about this stuff is you needed some foundation for how sociologists look at society to begin with. We needed to be able to really be clear on macro versus micro level distinctions. We needed to be clear on social structure and develop our sociological imaginations a little bit. But some of the information that we talk about in Unit 4, actually all of the information that we talk about in Unit 4, is really practical information that you can apply to your daily life experience or to decades of your life experience, because we're talking about macro scale social structure issues like these social institutions that we reviewed in last week's lectures. But those things are so easily applicable to our lives because we live our life within the social structure, and therefore we have some personal experiences to apply to these macro scale things that we're studying about in Unit 4. So Unit 4 is covering Chapter 11 and 12. It's only those two chapters, but remember we have 4 major topics in those 2 chapters, and really a 5th one that I've thrown in. Y'all like my little pointer that I got? Actually, thank you, Tom Russell, for my little pointer. You're the one who gave it to me. But we've thrown in a 5th one up here, the economy, which is a social institution also that's not really addressed directly in chapters 11 and 12, but we're overlapping it, honey, because the economy really overlaps with all of these topics. Okay, so make sure you have your notes out, make sure you've got your textbook out to the chapters I just referred to, and pick up in your notes where you left off with the most recent video from week 12, because this conversation is a continuation about how family, see how I've got a capital F here, we're talking about macro scale structures of the family, are linked not only to the economy, but other social arrangements that are in our society, marriage, and also something we're going to talk about today that's, I almost said marriage light, it's not even close to marriage light, cohabitation, or what your grandma calls shacking. So we're going to talk about these domestic arrangements, our household arrangements, those smallest scale economic structures in our society, those households, and the connection that these things have with family, and the connections that these things have with, oh, see this word here? I'm not going to be able to use my pointer for this one. I need to be able to circle it. Legal aspects in society. This word legal here is going to be tied with the economy, and actually I could throw in a 6th social institution. I'm not gonna, don't freak out, but we can throw in a 6th concept, the government, or the legal system that is a web of sorts that helps control some of our behavior too, and shape our society in a particular way that makes our society and not some other. So family is connected to the economy, and these 2 concepts from Chapter 11 are really linked with social identity, the social identity part of the family. They're linked, that definition, I mean, the sociological definition of the family that has those bullet points that we included in the last lecture that we had together. Social identity is wrapped in these concepts of marriage and cohabitation. Also, that commitment to live together and cooperate economically, those are tied into marriage and cohabitation. But you're going to see a big big, I think, for those of you who have never contemplated marriage or had a frank conversation about marriage before, for those of you who maybe learned about what marriage is supposed to be from a Disney movie and happily ever after, Twitter-pated kind of feelings, this is not the lecture that's going to bolster those kinds of ideas about marriage. This is a lecture that's going to look at the practical reasons behind macro scale social structural organization of marriage as it relates to family and particularly the economy. So let's get started, okay? So you might have noticed in that definition of the family that we have from the last lecture, please look at it now. If you don't already have it out in front of you, stop this and go get it. But there's nothing in there about love, really. We talked about living together in a commitment and caring for each other, and I mentioned that members of the human race, we are social animals, and we have psychological and emotional needs in addition to those economic ones. And the idea of the family, that's the structure overall where we are supposed to get the most of our psychological and emotional support in addition to that economic cooperation. So it didn't say anything, though, when it said care for each other. I guess you could interpret that as being a love relationship, but we didn't say anything about how members of the family were obligated to love each other. Love doesn't come into this discussion, really. This is more about economics and more about the legal structure of marriage in the United States, and it's not about the idea of choosing a mate based on destiny or God's ordination or a love kind of feeling that so many of us are reared with this notion that there's one person and one person only for us. And I have an affected tone of voice while I'm saying that because it's unrealistic for us to think that daily life and the logistics of successful marriages in the long haul are simply going to be something that's sustained by love and happy feelings toward each other. Because love, frankly, is an emotion that has fluctuations like a roller coaster. And some of you are saying, oh yeah, when I mention that right now. Love can, from one moment to the next, change from, I think you are the most magnificent creature on God's green earth, to, I hate you and I can't believe you would do this to me. How can somebody who says they love me do this to me, and you ignore this and you ignore that and you haven't taken out the garbage? So it can completely change from one roller coaster side to the next. And that's very volatile for a relationship. That's very volatile for all of those items on that list of the sociological definition of the family. So I want you to kind of notice while we're talking about this sociological perspective of things today regarding marriage and family and economy and cohabitation and family and economy, think about the fact that love is intentionally absent from this concept that we are talking about today. Additionally, religion is something that a lot of folks, particularly in the Bible Belt where we live, a lot of folks associate marriage with something that's tied to religion. You will also notice that this discussion today leaves out religious contexts of marriage. That's different. We're going to talk about marriage and the legal aspects of it in the United States, and how marriage is also an economic arrangement between people. And cohabitation is not an economic arrangement, not that's socially recognized between people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me start at the beginning of this lecture rather than jumping into the deep end before we've got the foundations to understand it. So let's talk about a sociological definition of marriage. Emphasis on the word sociological, okay? So a good sociological definition of marriage must have these 4 bullet points in it. A sociological definition of marriage that applies to as many cultures around the world as possible must say that it's a socially accepted union. That means that the people around you, that social identity part of the family unit that we referred to a little while ago, that social identity part is something that society as a whole on the macro scale, they look at that particular arrangement and they say, yes, that is a marriage based on the norms of our society. Not every society has legal documents, legal forms, legal arrangements to back up the marriage agreement. Some societies simply have informal social gatherings, social recognition that these 2 or more, look at this, 2 or more people are united in a relationship that this society says is a marriage. In the United States, however, legal is the only accepted condition of an arrangement, a living arrangement that says this particular group of people, in the United States in particular, 2 is the legal arrangement that's acceptable. Other places, no. There's a vocabulary word in your textbook. Some of you have heard about it before. Polygamy. It means that one spouse can have multiple spouses of the opposite sex. That's where the 2 or more comes in. In the United States, polygamy is not something that is legally recognized. You might find minor examples of people who have a husband who call 4 or 5 people wife, and those 4 or 5 women agree to be called wife. That's not a legal arrangement, okay? So in the United States, the only socially accepted union that's called a marriage and that is recognized and has rights and privileges associated with the economic structure in our nation is a legal arrangement. So you might ask how or what are these legal things that you have to do in order to be in a marriage. So let's address that really quick. And some of you, I know some of you have been married before, not all. I've learned a lot about your life experiences through your reaction papers this semester, and I enjoy that you open up and share some personal experiences with me. Thank you for doing that. So I know some of you are married and some of you are not. Let's talk about all of the legal aspects of being married. Starting out with the very first action that's usually required in order for somebody to become a fiancé, okay? Usually there is something called a proposal. A proposal is considered legal when a ring is exchanged. Did you all know that? The ring is a binding agreement between the person who proposes, which in our patriarchy, the assumption is it's going to be the male, and the assumption is the male is going to communicate his ability for economic support of that female, because our patriarchy includes that assumption, that they're going to present their economic prowess, their ability to support that person and any future children that might come because of that ring. That ring is a contract. There is no legal document that you must sign when you accept it, because it is socially accepted in our society that that ring is the very first step in the legal contract of marriage. Other things are also included in that legal concept of marriage. You have to get all kinds of permits, basically. You have to get a marriage license. You have to find, and that costs, I don't know, y'all can Google, see how much that costs. It costs a little different amount from one place to the next. I think it's like $80, something like that. So you have to go to the court and you have to say, I am this person and this is this person and we want to marry. Can we buy the license to do so? $80, something like that. Then it has like an expiration date. Again, I don't know all these expiration dates and all these prices. It's not important. Google can tell you that. but it's usually around 90 days or something, maybe 120 days. You have to get your marriage license, and then it expires if you don't go through with it before that time period. So there's another legal aspect of it. And you can't just go get your marriage license from the courthouse and then come to your sociology teacher and say, "Can you marry us?" No, I'm not licensed through the state, the powers vested in me through the state of Arkansas. I don't have those powers vested in me through the state of Arkansas, because there's another legal aspect of marriage in the United States. You have to go to someone who has the legal power vested in them because they have been licensed. They pay their licensing fees annually, and they make sure that they keep up with the legal requirements of marriage as legal requirements of marriage change over the years, which they do. And therefore, you go to that person, not just any random person who you might think would be cool to marry you. And you also can't skip this step. You can't go and buy the marriage license and then both of you take your dogs up to the top of Pinnacle Mountain and scream to north, south, east, and west that you marry each other, and come back down and have it be the socially accepted partnership called a marriage that our society requires. No. Legal is part of every step of the way through the marriage. So you have to find that person who will do it. Sometimes they charge a set fee because, like I said, it costs them to maintain their license to be able to marry you. But other times it's just maybe, especially if it's a religious individual who you go to for that marriage ceremony, the religious individual will still have to be licensed through the state to perform the ceremony and have to say certain things like "power vested in me by the state" or something like this. So sometimes they accept like a donation, but usually there's a money exchange or some kind of gift exchange with that person, since it costs them annually to keep up their license. And then after that, oh yeah, you have to have witnesses to the license, appropriate witnesses. The number of witnesses changes from one place to the next. I think now in Arkansas, and again, you can Google this and find out, but I think now in Arkansas you only need one witness. You used to need two witnesses in addition to the person who performed the ceremony. But I think now it's just one. Again, I might be wrong on that. The specific details in this conversation are not the things that are really important here, because those are going to change from place to place anyway. The laws in Mississippi are different than Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee. So the specific details are not what I want to focus on here. I want to focus on all of the legal arrangements. So after the person who has the power to marry you has married you, and the witnesses have attested to the fact, probably a signature or something, they've attested to the fact that they saw you willingly enter this and no one was coerced, then you have to go one more time and register it or like certify it. I don't even know the proper word here, but you go back to the court and you register your marriage and say, "Hey, we went through with it, and here's the proof." And then you are legally bound. And there's a whole bunch of rigmarole you have to go through if you ever want to be unlegally bound. And that's why we have a specific word for breaking up a marriage. Instead of just saying breakup, we say divorce. Because the way we get out of the legal bonds of marriage isn't just moving out of the house, it's going through a legal arrangement called a divorce. Okay? So, there's so many different legal arrangements that are associated with just becoming married in the first place. But when we get down to this next bullet point, or one of the next bullet points on our list, the rights and the obligation thing, there's going to be additional legal aspects that are tied up in the fact that you are legally married to someone that rights and obligations covers, or is affected by this legal arrangement. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So marriage is a legal arrangement. It costs money to make that legal arrangement, but marriage is far cheaper than, as far as a legal arrangement, than going through powers of attorney and paying for those, or living wills and paying somebody to do all this kind of stuff. When we get here, that'll become a little bit more clear. Okay, so In that sociological definition of family, which hopefully you're still referring to as I'm talking to you here, when it says living together with commitment, one of the commitments that's assumed in that traditional, see my air quotes here, traditional family, remember I'm saying traditional because it's connection to the economy with that two adult structure at the head of household, the two adults in the economic arrangement. So living together, cooperating economically, there is an assumption that the two adults are going to be married. There are advantages that the two adults are married. There are civil rights associated with adults who are married that are not extended to somebody who's just your roommate, according to the law. Okay. So, big major aspect of marriage and understanding marriage in the United States. This socially accepted union called a marriage in the United States, legal, key word here, okay? But to make the definition of marriage very general, you need to say both. It's a socially accepted arrangement or legal. Socially accepted, and some places the only social acceptance is a legal arrangement, okay? So there's your first bullet point. I've already referred to this two or more people here because in the United States we have something, the only legal form is something called monogamy. That means two spouses and only two spouses, a fidelity relationship, refers to this one down here, between those two spouses and only two spouses. However, so that's the two part. However, a lot of places in the world, socially accepted unions can include, not obligated, but can include more individuals than just two. That's called polygamy. Polygamy occurs when there's one spouse of one sex, male or female, and multiple spouses of the opposite sex, male or female. Okay, so there's two different subwords under polygamy that you can look up those definitions in your chapter 11. But polygamy is a socially accepted arrangement in many, many places around the world. It's not a legally accepted arrangement in the United States. In the United States, you can only legally be married to one spouse and one spouse at a time. However, because of other freedoms of expression and freedoms of religion and freedoms of all sorts of civil rights in the Bill of Rights that are extended to U.S. citizens and residents, some people agree through their free will to have multiple sex partners and even use the words husband, wife with multiple people and live that way, introduce people and try to have their social identity associated with multiple spouses. However, legally, you can only be tied to one person at a time. If you try to legally be tied to more than one person at a time through what we call a marriage, that's actually a crime in the United States, and the crime is called bigamy. This means two. Okay? Anytime you see this suffix on the end of a word, it's referring to marriage of some sort. Often we use the word monogamy, incorrectly really, to refer to an exclusive sexual relationship. However, that's because of this word that we're going to talk about. That's because of this shacking stuff, like your grandma says, that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But bigamy is a crime in the United States. Here, listen to that word that's also a legal word, right? In the U.S., you are only legally allowed for two people to join in the marriage, and only those two. If you try to commit fraud and present yourself as not being legally bound to one person when you really are, and try to get legally bound to another person simultaneously, sometimes people succeed, that's a crime called bigamy. And it's because of the legal protections, benefits, rights, obligations that are extended to married people in the economic structure and in the government structure that we have in the U.S. Okay? So that's why the two or more people are here. Again, you're not going to get this or more part if you make your personal definition of marriage come from a Disney movie or come from what your preacher says. That's why the sociological definition of marriage is what's important for the context of this class, your cultural awareness of the diversity in the world. and the legal arrangements that exist in the US that are specific, they're linked to what your preacher says. The reason our laws only allow two is because it's linked to what your preacher is saying. Remember, we said that the U.S. culture, foundations of U.S. culture are built on Christian ideas and Christian values. We will talk about that much more in depth when we get to the religion part of chapter 12. Very interesting stuff. So the reason two or more, two and only two is the legal arrangement in the U.S. is because of the religious overtones or the religious norms that affect our social structure. But two and only two can be legally married in the United States. We are free people in the United States, so if you want to have 6 females living in the house with you and call all of them wife and they call you, all of them call you husband, or vice versa, 1 wife and 6 people who call themselves husband, if that's the arrangement that free people choose to engage in, those words husband and wife can be used that way, but that doesn't mean that they are legally recognized according to the eyes of the state. And I don't just mean the state of Arkansas, but the government of our nation. And also the economy. Okay, so rights and obligations. Let's get to this one, because this is where the legal aspects of marriage in the United States trickle down into daily married life. For instance, there's ideas about income, ideas about property, like cars, like houses, certainly, or a lease on an apartment, washers and dryers, rugs, couches, these kinds of things. Typically, the idea is, when you become married, you're going to start living together with commitment, like that part of the family definition that you've got in your notes. Part of that is acquiring stuff. Marriage includes with it the legal arrangement that whatever you bring into the relationship after the marriage has happened, or whatever you bring into the relationship, whatever you had beforehand, technically the new spouse has a right to it. If you have a spouse, married word, not just a roommate, unmarried word. If you have a spouse, whatever you bring into the relationship with you upon your death is legally the property of that spouse. If you divorce, it's a different story. You can take with you, but you have to have someone else decide, how do we split up the washer and dryer, and how do we split up, equitable distribution of assets is a legal thing. You have to go through mediation or some kind of court case in order to do that kind of thing, or have uncontested agreement that's filed with the court and all this kind of stuff. But there's rights and obligations that the married partners have. For instance, I'm married. And I entered into a legal arrangement with my spouse, and at the time I did that, my credit was good, my income was good, my retirement account was okay and building, I had all kinds, I'm working toward my Social Security, I'm doing, signing a mortgage with this man and that kind of thing. I have an obligation to continue doing those things with a good faith effort. I have an obligation to avoid as much as possible the tendency, the inclination, the desire to go and blow all of my paycheck regularly at the new casino in Pine Bluff. I have an obligation to be faithful to this person. There is an understanding that there's going to be sexual fidelity. I have an obligation to do that. I have rights, for instance. If I have surgery or if he has surgery, he does not have to sign some kind of special paper or have an attorney draw up some kind of special agreement that tells the hospital, this woman over here has the right to make medical decisions for me if I'm incapacitated and can't. The legal arrangement of marriage has included in there the assumption of this man wants to give that woman those rights, or vice versa. That marriage agreement has all of those things in there. There's all kinds of rights to Social Security benefits, for instance, if you are within the marriage bond. You have children with rights to Social Security benefits if those children are produced within the marriage bond. There are legal children and there are illegal children. You can look up the concept of an illegitimate child. Not really a concept that we speak about so much anymore because our society has changed significantly. But 50 years ago, an illegitimate child was someone who was a little bit stigmatized in our society. Not that way anymore, but it was stigmatized in our society because that child was produced without the marriage bond. That illegitimate word is illegal. It means illegal. And so this is another idea. There's an assumption of sexual activity with marriage. And, don't tell anybody, but babies come from sexual activity, okay? And so the idea is another bullet point on our family definition where we're going to care for young. The assumption is young people are going to be produced within the legally sanctioned relationship called marriage. So there's not always sexual activity in a marriage, for instance, because remember, love has no place in any of these bullet points on this sociological definition of marriage. And I want to mention that again, and also usually sexual activity. The reason I have it written this way is because around the world, many times, arranged marriages are a norm, are an acceptable social arrangement, an arranged marriage. So, in some cases, arranged marriages are designed by elders in the kinship line. Remember, I referred to the term kinship in our last lecture. So, arranged marriages are organized by people with authority in the kinship group. And quite often, young people are married to each other, and there is an assumption that they're going to do all these kinds of things, and the sexual activity is going to produce children. And those children are really the bond that unites those two kinship groups and unites those individuals in a socially accepted union called marriage. In some places, a marriage is not considered a marriage until children are produced. In some places, okay? Not here. My husband and I do not have any biological children together. We have a legal marriage, however. So, arrangement is not always going to include the sexual activity, however, because in some places, because marriage is an economic arrangement, and the domestic function of a wife in a patriarchal system is a caregiver. That's the domestic function of a wife in a patriarchal system. So especially in patriarchal systems, you might have an elderly man whose elderly wife might have died, or maybe his elderly wife is still alive, but the ability for them to care for each other's daily needs is not there anymore. They're elderly. And so maybe an impoverished family with a healthy 16-year-old girl, with this wealthier elderly couple, maybe a very smart economic move would be to make an arrangement for the 16-year-old to marry the elderly man and really serve more as the arrangement can include rights or obligations to care for these people into their elderhood with a payoff of a much higher standard of living, a less impoverished lifestyle, and a little bit of money after all is said and done, and she dutifully buries, the two people she has cared for in their old age. A lot of times, sexual activity is not part of that kind of marriage. Marriages, really, I'm sorry to tell you, and those people who already have been in a marriage, successful marriages focus much more on the economic feasibility of being with the person than the way they make me feel. It's just, sorry, I don't want you to think, I told you I'm married, and I certainly don't want you to think that I don't love my husband. I do. That's part of the socially acceptability of our relationships in the United States. We assume there's going to be love. But there's much, much more about the glue that holds marriage together when you're on the same page about this. when you're on the same page about these things, being on the same page is not the same thing as the love emotion, which is certainly part of our micro scale ideas of marriage, but on the macro scale, look, it's not anywhere in here. Sorry to also tell you, this does not require love emotions. Sorry to tell you. But none of this has any bearing on, this definition doesn't have any bearing on love as a prerequisite, okay? Economics, in our case in the United States, legal considerations. These are what a marriage is built on from a society standpoint. Remember, Disney movies and your preacher are not included in this analysis of marriage. They're not included in a proper sociological definition of marriage. They're included in our norms. They're included in our ideas. They are included in our expectations that we place on others, but not in the sociological definition of marriage. Okay, let me stop standing in front of cohabitation and let's talk about cohabitation for a second, because wait. No, okay, a thought just crossed my mind. A thought just crossed my mind that I needed to talk about what's it called? A common law marriage. There we go. I couldn't think of the term for a second. Some of you are saying, what about common law marriage? Ooh, let's look at the law. Law is a legal word. So let's talk about common law in just a second. We'll talk about cohabitation first, because that's what common law marriage statutes rely on, is cohabitation over a period of time. Okay, so I wish I was here. I wish you were with me in front, in front of me, so that you could remind me that I'm supposed to say this, but I'll do my best to remember, and if I forget, I'll type it up and stick it in Blackboard for you. Okay, so cohabitation is also another arrangement that you'll read about in chapter 11. And this is a very, very, very popular social arrangement that people your age and generations above you actually are very, very inclined to do. Statistics are interesting with cohabitation. Most people who cohabitate, when sociologists ask them, why are you doing this? It's because this idea is a little scary. This idea is a little scary to them, and most people say they want to try it out first, kind of test the waters, so to speak, in order to find out if they would work out okay. One interesting statistic is, and remember, statistics change all the time. Your book might say one thing. I think it was published 2017 or 18, so the statistic that you Google today would probably be a little different. But most people who cohabitate before marriage end up in divorce. When I say most people, it's something like 85% of people who cohabitate first end up in divorce after all. So even though they say they're cohabitating to try to see if it's going to work out, statistics don't prove that that helps at all. Usually it's mindset. Usually it's an understanding of this and this, going in, a like-minded person going into this with you, and that's what can really contribute to success overall. And another thing that can contribute to success overall, when we said that the legal arrangement includes two people, there's usually, yes, the legal arrangement includes two people in the United States, but there's never just two people in a marriage. If he has family and friends and you have family and friends, then those family and friends are in your ear and his ear all the time and affecting the interpersonal communication and understanding of satisfaction, marital satisfaction. When kids come along, you got more people in the marriage, so the more like-minded everybody is, not just the two who are engaged in the marriage, but the family in his background, the family in this background, the more like-minded both of those groups of people are, the more likely it is that the marriage will be successful over the long haul. Okay, so back to cohabitation. It is being a roommate, essentially, but it's not just being a roommate and sharing expenses. You cooperate economically, but the assumption is you're in a romantic relationship. And not only are you in a romantic relationship, but you don't hide it from those around you. Remember, the family definition has social identity as part of the concept. So you see yourselves as a couple, and others around you identify you as a couple. But you don't have the legal bond of marriage. And I have something funny, intended to be funny down here on the board. Just watch some of Judge Judy's episodes, because you see very often people who were living together. Well, I thought we were going to do this, so I co-signed a truck. I thought we were going to do this, so the credit card was in my name and I bought the washer and dryer. I saw we were going to do this, but he was the only one on the lease and I didn't have legal rights to it. Legal, legal, legal. And Judge Judy usually says, sorry, the law is not designed to help you. This is not a divorce. She can't grant an equitable distribution of property. You might feel jilted even though you had this much money that you put in on good faith that this was going to happen. But cohabitation has no legal bonds associated with it. It is just really playing house like we did when we were 5 and 6, really. And there's a whole lot of economic cooperation that goes into cohabitation. Whole lot. So when that emotional roller coaster of love goes from here, and I love you so much, to here, and I can't stand your face, then that's when this is very, very volatile, and you end up, somebody's jilted, somebody's been, done bad economically, and we need somebody else to come in and decide it. Well, that's when Judge Judy's going to tell you, well, there's not a legal outlet for you. You weren't married. Children of cohabitating people, you can put somebody else's name on the birth certificate to make the child legally belong to a father. In our patriarchal system, that's important, the last name. Well, there's a legal step that females have to go through if they want to change last names. But anyway, the cohabitation, when children are produced, you can go through some legal steps to make sure that the biological father is identified on the birth certificate. But there's not, there's still not the legitimate idea of the child, because there wasn't a marriage bond when the child was produced. Okay, common law marriages. Not every state has a legal statute that recognizes common law. But what common law does is it offers a little bit of legal protection to people who cohabitate for a certain length of time. In some states it might be 5 years, and other places 7, 10, I don't know how long. I think Arkansas used to have a common law statute to where if you were living together for more than 7 years constantly, then the law saw you. It wasn't just you and your buddies who saw you and your lover as a permanent couple, but the law began to see you and your lover as a couple. So common law statutes don't exist everywhere, so you can't count on it. I remember a colleague of mine years ago when I was at the University of West Florida, a colleague of mine had a common law marriage in Colorado. He and his wife lived together in Colorado without the legal bonds of marriage for more than 20 years and then relocated to Florida, that at that time did not have a common law statute. And so when he tried to put her on his benefits at work and buy health insurance for her or do all of the, the things that you can do for a spouse through your work that has employment benefits, he was cut short. They wouldn't allow him to add her to those kinds of things like health insurance and that kind of stuff, because in Florida did not recognize their couplehood as a legal marriage. They didn't have a common law statute at the time. So, again, this doesn't really have anything about love in it, although cohabitation usually occurs because people think they're in love with each other. The romantic relationship, of course, refers to this sexual activity also. So there are lots of aspects. I only have 3 bullet points over here and 4 bullet points over here, but you can probably see some parallels and probably find plenty of Judge Judy episodes on YouTube or something where she is talking to couples trying to hash out who gets the washer and who gets the dryer for these couples who have had everything go wrong before a marriage. and therefore they don't have the legal protections that they would have in a divorce if the marriage broke up. But it's just a living arrangement that broke up, like roommates moving out and trying to decide who gets custody of the dog, for instance. Okay, so lots of stuff, lots of miles we covered in this lecture, but lots of practical things that maybe you are relating to your micro-scale social experiences that we all have in our lifetime. But remember, please, we are not in sociology talking about social institutions on the micro scale. Social institutions affect us on the micro scale, but they exist on the macro scale across the scope of society. They establish norms and social facts across the scope of society and trickle down on us and affect us on the micro scale. So you're thinking about some micro scale examples right now. You're thinking about an example from a movie. You're thinking about an example from your past experiences. Those micro scale examples are great, but use your sociological imagination and zoom out and identify the macro scale components of our social assumptions about these things and how that had a bearing on your experiences and your outcomes in life. This corresponds to chapter 11. Lots of stuff. Please text me with your questions. Please contact me through email or the phone, whatever your preference is. And I hope you learned a lot. I'll see you again for at least one more lecture during week 13, this is. And I'll see you soon. Thanks.